verse in the days of the judges. So, last week we talked about the judges, and this story of Ruth occurs during that time period. And I know it was 2 weeks ago because of fall break, but remember we have, briefly, we have the Exodus. We have 40 years of wandering because of the lack of trust and faith of the people of Israel. We have the entrance into the Promised Land finally under the leadership of Joshua. We have Israel taking possession of at least a good chunk of Canaan, although the other people, the other ites, are still there. And then we have this period called the Judges. And remember, the Judges are more like warriors usually than they are jurists. They are charismatic leaders that are raised up to defend Israel, sometimes against an enemy. And the book of Judges is actually a pretty depressing book because the people fall into such disobedience so frequently. Some of the judges themselves are not exactly paragons and heroes. Gideon is a pretty good guy, but he lacks faith. Samson's kind of a doofus who succeeds in spite of himself. Deborah is the only probably judge in the book that we can really look up to as a total personality. So that period of the Judges, if you notice, we ended, the book of Judges ends with that sort of troubling verse, the very last verse of Judges. In those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. That's the last verse in the last chapter of Judges. Everyone did as they saw fit. So there is very little direction among the people of Israel, leading to a lot of problems. But this little story of Ruth takes place in the midst of that. And until you get to the end of the book, you might say, well, why is this story even in here? It's sort of a little romance story. But you might say, well, why is this in the Bible? And it's not until the reveal at the end that we know why this story is in the Bible. Because it tells us about a family in the first chapter, about a man from the town of Bethlehem, which right off our ears, we always perk up when we hear the word Bethlehem. A man named Elimelech, who had a wife named Naomi. And matter of fact, the word Naomi means pleasant one. That's what the name Naomi means, pleasant one. Elimelech and his wife Naomi, and two sons named Mahlon and Chilion. And it says this family are living during one of the times of basically famine. There was a time in which there was not enough food, and so to be able to find food, they actually relocate to Moab. Moab, one of those people that the Israelites often were in conflict with, sometimes had wars with. One of these so-called pagan people. But to find food, this Israelite man, his wife, and their two sons moved to Moab. And while there, they married two local Moabite women, which, at least at first glance, seems to be against some of the prohibitions that we read about marrying foreign women. But they do marry two Moabite women. One of the sons marries Orpah, and the other Ruth. Side bit of trivia, Oprah Winfrey's mother thought she was naming her daughter after this woman in the Bible. But she got the letters reversed. Instead of Orpah, she named her Oprah. But that's where Oprah Winfrey's name comes from. It's her mother thinking she was naming her Orpah. That's just a side bit of trivia. And the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, these two Moabite women. And right off the bat, we find out that while they are in Moab, tragedy strikes. Not only does Elimelech die, but both of the sons die. All the men in the family die, leaving just Naomi and her two daughters-in-law. And Naomi decides to go back to Israel. And she tells the two daughters-in-law, I release you, go back to your own people, go back to your own households, find yourself new husbands, and good luck and God bless. And the two daughters-in-law say, no, we're going to stick with you. And there in Ruth 1:11, she says, no, you don't want to do that. Because she then references the fact that Israeli law would say, well, if a man dies, the brother has the responsibility to take the widow on as a new wife. But she says, I don't have any other sons, And she says, are you going to wait around for me to have a son and wait for him to grow up and be old enough to marry you? In other words, that's a preposterous. One, she's getting past the age where she could do that. She'd have to find her own husband and get pregnant at an older age. She says, that's not going to happen. I have no more sons to give you. So you better go back to your own people and find a husband there. She says, they're in 1:11, about halfway through that. Am I going to have more sons who can become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than for you. The Lord's hand has gone out against me. And with that, Orpah says, okay, and she heads back to Moab. But Ruth says, no, I'm sticking with you. I'm going to go with you back to your people. And Ruth says these words that I've heard used in a lot of, these sort of beautiful words in Ruth 1:16. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. I've even heard of those verses being used in a wedding. People not realizing this is not between a man and a woman. This is between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. Those two these words are spoken. So Ruth is insistent on sticking with her mother-in-law. So they go back to Bethlehem. And it says the people are like, whoa, look who's back. Is it Naomi? Remember, Naomi means pleasant one. And she says, don't call me pleasant one. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, which is the same as Mary, which means bitter. Sorry for people named Mary, but that's what the word means. It means bitter. She says, don't call me the pleasant one. Call me the bitter one. Because the Almighty, in other words, Shaddai, is the word there in Hebrew. Shaddai. We sometimes hear the word El Shaddai, God Almighty. She says, Shaddai has made my life bitter. So call me Mara.
Did it always say that way? Because it was Mary and Joseph. Was she bitter?
That's what the name means. Yeah, yeah. Don't believe those things like, what does your name mean? Because if your name means something not good, they'll just lie about it. Because they don't want anybody, you're not going to buy it if it tells you the truth that your name doesn't mean something good. And in the time of Mary and Joseph in the New Testament, they estimate that nearly half of the women in Israel were named Mary. That's right, there's so many Marys in the New Testament. Based on gravestones and burial plots and things like that. Mary was the name, but it means bitter. So they're back in Bethlehem, but their future is pretty bleak. And it's at the time of the barley harvest. And so what can you do? Well, remember when we read all those obscure kind of laws back in Leviticus? Go back to Leviticus 19 for a minute. Leviticus 19. Where I said that Leviticus is full of laws, some of which were more about, how to organize the community and a lot of things about property rights and territorial rights. Look at Leviticus 19:9. Leviticus 19:9. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am Yahweh, your God. This is a law in Leviticus saying when you harvest your field, and don't go out to the very edge of the property, and if you drop something, don't pick it up. You leave behind a little bit of the food, and that is the welfare program. That is one of the ways that the poor are able to survive in a community, in a culture where there is no welfare, where there is no food stamp, where there is no government program, where there is no other way. One of the ways that they cared for the poor and the stranger, the alien, was called gleaning. Gleaning, and that's what this is. Leaving behind stuff on the vines, leaving behind bits, and not going through the field a second time. If you go through it once and you miss something, you leave it. And the poor could come, and that's how they could get food, was from the gleanings. Well, that's how Ruth is going to survive, by gleaning. So, she says, Ruth says to her mother-in-law in Ruth 2:2, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. That she's going to make use of this law of gleaning to be able to get food. So that's what she does. And it says, as it turned out, and we would say maybe not just maybe, providentially, the field she goes to work in is a man named Boaz, who happens to be of the same clan as Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. And Boaz is a happy, jolly fellow, and he comes out one day, his men work in the fields, and he sees this woman gleaning behind his harvester. Says, who's that? They say, well, that's the Moabitess. That's that woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She's been gleaning all day. And so Boaz approaches her and says, listen, you just keep working my fields. Don't go to any other fields. Stay here and follow along behind my people. And I've told the men not to touch you. Which you could see, he wouldn't have said that if that was not a very real reality. That a woman on her own, a woman with no protection, could easily be raped in this kind of situation. So he's told his men not to touch her. And he says she can even drink from their water jugs and all that. And she basically says, why are you being so nice to me? I'm a foreigner. I'm a Moabite, a Moabitess. And he says, I've heard your story and the fact that you've stuck with your mother-in-law and you impressed me. So she's grateful, and he invites her to come and even eat with him. So then he tells the men, you know what? When you're pulling out the stuff, leave a little extra behind. drop some things on purpose. So which they do. So she keeps on gleaning. She collects a lot of barley and brings home a lot for a day of gleaning. And her mother-in-law is impressed. Where did you get all that? And she tells her mother-in-law the story, tells whose field she's been in, the field of Boaz. And Naomi says, well, he's related to my husband. And he's one of the kinsman redeemers. Now, again, how do you take care of a widow? Especially how do you take care of a young widow? The way you take care of a young widow is if her husband dies, her brother is responsible for marrying her and giving her a son, and the son is then to be given the name of the dead husband, and the son then inherits the property of the dead husband. Because women don't have property rights. So how do you care for the young widow? She has to be, somebody in the family, the brother preferably, marries her, has a son by her, and that son now becomes the inheritor of the dead husband's property. But in this case, both brothers died. So you have to go to the next closest relative. And that's what they call, at least in my translation, the kinsman redeemer. She says Boaz is part of our clan. He's one of our kinsman redeemers. So she says, yes, stick with him. And then, a part of the story that is open to some interpretation. In chapter 3, she says, tonight, at the end of the harvest time, tonight, 3, in the middle of verse 2. Tonight they'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself. Put on your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor. Don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. I'll do whatever you say, Ruth said, and she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, and eating and drinking in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? I'm your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. Now, different people have suggested exactly what was happening in this moment. How innocent or, was this and was it not? Is there something sexual happening here or not? One of the reasons that people have suggested that is because the word that's translated feet here in Hebrew actually is a word that refers to anything from the thigh down. And so, exactly what is she uncovering? And how is he interpreting what she's doing? But he says, God bless you. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You haven't run after young men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. What is she asking?
Marriage.
Right. She's asking that he take her as a wife. That's what's happening here. He's asking that he marry her. And he says, don't worry. I'm going to do the right thing. And you've got a good reputation. And he says the only one issue is there's one relative that's closer to you than me. And we're not told exactly, cousins and exactly what that means. But since there's no brothers, it goes to the next, the next closest relative. He says there's one relative that's closer to you than I am, and he has first pick. You think, well, what's that about? Well, Elimelech had land. Okay? Before he left Bethlehem to go to Moab, Elimelech had land. That land's been sitting there going to weeds, and however long this has been on. Whoever marries her gets possession of that land. Although, by marrying her, the first son then inherits that property. You see how the lines of inheritance run. So he says, I want to marry you, I want to do the right thing, but there's one other man closer than me. So I'll do what I can. And then he says, stay here till morning. Then verse 14, she lay at his feet till morning. She got up before anyone could be recognized. He said, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he also said, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. And he poured in barley and sent her home with it. So he doesn't really want anybody to see her leaving. So again, what happened exactly, or what the rumors could be, they don't want rumors. But he sends her home, and he says, I don't want to send you home empty-handed. Because remember, Naomi came and said, when Naomi came home, she's like, I'm bitter. Why? Because I'm empty. So she goes back to her mother-in-law with the grain, and Naomi says, wait, this man is not going to rest until he settles this. So he's going to settle it. So it says he goes down to the gates of the city or the town of Bethlehem and says, I need 10 men. He needs 10 witnesses for what he's about to do. And he finds 10 men, and he finds the relative that is closer to Elimelech than he is. We're not even told his name. Now, again, look back now to Deuteronomy 25. Deuteronomy 25. Here's the law I've been referencing. Deuteronomy 25, starting at verse 5. Deuteronomy 25:5. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. Then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. If he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. The family of the unsandaled. So this is how, again, how do you take care of young widows? This is how you take care of young widows and assure that they don't lose the property of their husband or the lineage of their dead husband. So there are no brothers. So you have to go to the next closest relative. So here's what happens. Boaz says, I need 10 witnesses. He finds the man who is closer than he is to the family of Elimelech. Boaz, this is 4:2. He took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here. They did so. He said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who's come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. Brother there not meaning literal brother, meaning kinsman. Okay. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you'll redeem it, do so. If you will not tell me, so I will know, no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm next in line. I'll redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, oh, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I can't redeem it. I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I can't do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. So this is a little slightly different variation. There's no spitting in the face going on here. And it appears that Ruth herself or Naomi are not even a part of this little settlement. But you can see where it evolved from that. And so the other guy's like, I don't want to endanger my own inheritance by having a son that's not really my son, and that's you want a redeemer, go ahead. So Boaz says, okay, you're all witnesses. I'm getting the property, and I'm going to marry Ruth, and I'm going to maintain the property of her first husband. Today, you're witnesses. And they all say, yes, we're witnesses. And then they say, let her, be wonderful and have great, children. Look at their blessing. We are witnesses. May the Lord, this is 4:11. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. That's a kind of an odd reference. We didn't go into that story, but if you remember, Tamar got pregnant by her father-in-law, who thought she was a prostitute, if you remember that story. She had to trick her own father-in-law into carrying on the family line in that story. So that's not exactly the paragon of virtue you want to reference, but so they all say, yeah, let her, may she have lots of kids. And so he takes her, and they get married, and she gets pregnant, and she has a son. And now the women say to Naomi in verse 14, praise be the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He'll renew your life, sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son. Now, of course, literally, she has a grandson. But they're saying she now has, a descendant. She now has a male who can carry on her name, who someday can care for her in her old age. And they named him, you'd think they'd name him the name of the dead first husband, but they don't. They named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, and he was the father of David. And you say, oh, now we know why we have this story. This story is here because it's the story that connects us back to David. It's one of those stories where you almost, who remembers Paul Harvey? The rest of the story. No, well, I remember. I remember Paul Harvey. I'm not that old, but if you remember Paul Harvey, if you don't know, Paul Harvey, a radio guy, and he would tell these little anecdotes, and it wasn't until the end of the story that you kind of knew what the significance of the story was, because he would say, that man's name was John F. Kennedy, or something, and he would tell you, oh, now we're talking about this famous person. This whole story is in the Bible because it tells you how the family of David. It tells you the story of David's family, because we're about to see the story of David. And this is a little bit anecdote about his background, and it's also there to kind of say, almost as a counterbalance, to say, now wait a minute, who is in part of David's line? A foreigner. David's great-grandmother is a Moabite. Now I mentioned that when you get to the New Testament, there's 4 women in Jesus' genealogy. The first one is a prostitute in the city of Jericho. The second one is a foreigner, a Moabite. Now, not exactly maybe the 2 women that you would think of being listed in Jesus' genealogy. Prostitute and a Moabite. But those are the first 2 women listed in Jesus' genealogy, of which there are only 4 women mentioned. So, this is the story of David's family, where he came from. And having had that story, we're ready to talk about 1 Samuel. So we turn the page, and Samuel is the book where we shift from the period of the judges to the monarchy. This is where we go from judges to kings. Samuel is the last judge. Samuel is the last of the judges. And he paves the way for the first king. And we're going to see the first king doesn't work out. It's only when we get to the second king that things start to work out. But first we have to know where Samuel came from. You might think, why is it not called the book of David? Well, because we start with the story of Samuel. And Samuel's story starts with a kind of a sad story. About a fella whose name was Elkanah. This is 1 Samuel 1. And he has 2 wives. As you can tell, in this period, polygamy is pretty common. Men have multiple wives. Jacob has 2 wives and 2 concubines. Here we have several people who have multiple wives. Elkanah has 2 wives, one called Hannah and one called Peninnah. Peninnah has children, but Hannah doesn't. And this is a constant source of sorrow for her. And every year, Elkanah and his 2 wives, they would go up to Shiloh to worship God. And there was a priest there named Eli. So Eli is a priest of the Lord in Shiloh, and he has 2 sons that we're going to hear more about later, Hophni and Phinehas. They're not going to end up being very good people. So he would go there every year to make sacrifices and worship Yahweh. And he would, give these offerings, and it says to Hannah, they would give portions of, you take the animal, you sacrifice it, and then they don't keep the whole animal. They would sacrifice a portion of the animal, and then you get the meat back. The priest would keep some, they sacrifice some, you get some of the meat back. And he says, when he got the meat back, he would give Hannah a double portion. Verse 5, 1:5, he gave Hannah a double portion because he loved her and the Lord had closed her womb. She was not able to have children. And here's where it gets really sad. Verse 6, because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival, in other words, the other wife, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? He's trying to cheer her up, but she is brokenhearted because she is not able to have a child. And so she is there one year in Shiloh, and she's praying. Verse 10, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept so much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, I'll give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be on his head. This is the Nazirite vow that we heard about. As she kept praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk. Why do you think that is?
They were supposed to pray out loud.
Yeah, silent prayer was not a thing. We take for granted praying in your heart, silent prayer, but in those days, prayer was always spoken out loud. If you went to the place to pray and you were talking to God, you talked, you used your voice. So her lips are moving, but nothing's coming out because she's so overcome with emotion. And Eli sees her lips are moving, but there's no sound coming out. He said, she's drunk. He said to her, how long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I'm a woman who is deeply troubled. I've not been drinking wine or beer. I've poured out my soul to the Lord. Don't take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. And so he said, oh, well, okay, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant you what you've asked. And that cheers her up a bit. Sure enough, she conceives a child. And she names him Samuel. Samuel, which means herd of God. Not herd like a herd of sheep. Herd as in, like God has heard me. God heard my prayer. Herd of God is what Samuel means. And so she has finally a son, and remember, what did she made this vow that if you'll give me a son, I'll give him back to you. So as soon as he's weaned, she takes him up to the priest, Eli, to live at the temple. I mean, it's not really a temple. I guess the temple hadn't been built, but this place of worship. Takes him to live with Eli. And she says to him, this is 1:26, as surely as you live, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord granted me what I asked, so now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he'll be given to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. So she takes the child and basically gives him to Eli to be his apprentice as a little kid. Then we have a prayer, a poem prayer of Hannah's. Then we find out that Eli has these two sons, 2:12. Eli's sons were wicked men. They had no regard for the Lord. And it goes on to say that they would, when the people brought the meat, they would demand more of it. They were only supposed to take a certain portion, but the two sons would take more than they were supposed to take. And it says in verse 16, if the man said to him, let the fat be burned up first, then take whatever you want, the servant would then say, no, hand it over now. If you don't, I'll take it by force. So they were strong-arming people who came to worship, demanding that they give them all of the meat, all of the offering. It says, the sin of the young man, verse 17, the sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight. They were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. Meanwhile, little Samuel's growing up, and his mother has even made him a little mini robe, a little mini priest outfit. Like he's a little mini-me there. And he's growing up, and he is a good boy, whereas the two actual sons of Eli are not. Eli, verse 22, it says Eli, verse 22, 2:22, Eli, who was very old, heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel and how they slept with all the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So they're not only stealing the food, they're sleeping with all the women who come. He said to them, why do you do such things? I'm hearing from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, it's not a good report that I hear spreading among the Lord's people. If a man sins against another man, God may mediate for him. If a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? His sons, however, didn't listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. So he's a very ineffective father, apparently. He said, you should stop doing this stuff. And they're like, yeah. And they keep on doing it. And this little verse at the end of that paragraph, verse 26, 2:26, Samuel continued to grow in stature and favor with the Lord and with men. So, we have Samuel growing up underneath as a miniature priest, a young priestly apprentice. And then we have the two sons of Eli who are wicked men, cheating people, demanding the women sleep with them, etc. So God is obviously not pleased with these two boys, these two sons. And I'm going to skip over to sort of the next crucial part here. This is the part you may have heard the story of before. Chapter 3. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. And so it's nighttime. They're laying down. In the middle of the night it says, 3:4, the Lord called Samuel. Samuel said, here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. Because he heard a voice say, Samuel. Samuel popped out of bed and ran into Eli. Here I am, what do you want? And it says, Eli said, I didn't call you. Go back to bed, lie down. Again the Lord said, Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. My son, Eli said, I didn't call. Go back and lie down. Verse 7, Samuel didn't know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time. Samuel got up, went to Eli. Here I am, you called me. Eli realized the Lord was calling him. So he tells Samuel, go lie down. If he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So that's what he does. And sure enough, God says, Samuel, Samuel. And little Samuel says, speak, for your servant is listening. And here's what he says to Samuel. See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family, from beginning to end. I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible. He failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. Samuel lay down until morning. That's the message God gives to little Samuel. And he opened the doors. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision. Yeah. Eli said, Samuel, my son, here I am. What was it he said to you? Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you. Well, you asked for it. He tells him, well, the Lord told me he's going to punish your family because you did not restrain the wickedness of your sons. And then it says, Eli said, well, he's the Lord. Let him do what's good in his eyes. So he's like, well, okay. And now we're just told Samuel grows up. The Lord was with, 19, the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up. He let none of his words fall to the ground, and all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. So Samuel grows to be priest and prophet, and in many ways judge. Samuel grows to be the spokesperson for the Lord in Israel. And the people of Israel recognize that he is speaking for God. So now we kind of jump forward. He's now a grown man. And the Israelites are in this continual struggle with the Philistines. And they decide, the Philistines are defeating them, and they're having these ongoing struggles with them, and so they decide, you know what, we need to take the Ark of the Covenant into battle. The Philistines get wind of this. Oh, they're going to bring the Ark? We've heard about this. And look at the Philistines' reaction. This is 4:7. The Philistines were afraid. The gods come into the camp. We're in trouble. Nothing like this has happened. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods. They got that part wrong. It's not gods, it's God. Who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues. Be strong, Philistines. Be men, or you'll be subject to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. And here's what happens. The Philistines fight, and the Israelites are defeated. Every man to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 soldiers, and the Ark of God is captured, and the two wicked sons of Eli are killed. Bring back. The Ark is not a magic box. It's not like, as long as we have this box, we have to win. If the hearts, especially these two priests, these wicked priests carrying it, if their hearts is not right, God is not going to fight for them. So they lose. And the word gets back to Eli. A messenger comes, and going down 4:17, the man brought the news. Israel fled before the Philistines. The army suffered heavy losses. Also your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And the ark has been captured. Now, what else could go wrong? When he mentioned the ark of God, not when he mentioned his sons being dead, but when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken and he died. So he falls over backwards in his chairs and breaks his neck when he hears this news. says he had been a priest for 40 years. And his daughter-in-law, the wife of one of these wicked priests, was pregnant at the time. When she hears the news, she goes into premature labor, and she gives birth to a baby, and they name the baby Ichabod. Ichabod. Where have you heard the name Ichabod? Yes, Ichabod Crane in what story? The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Yeah, the Headless Horseman. The word Ichabod means no glory. No glory. She names the child Ichabod, which means no glory, because the glory, the ark, has left Israel. So she names her child No Glory, Ichabod. Not one of the more popular names, probably, to have. Now, there's another little side story here that I'm not going to spend a lot of time with, but the bottom line is the ark is captured by the Philistines, and I think I even talked about this in the sermon a while back. They put the ark of God in the temple of their god, Dagon, and Dagon's idol falls over in the night. They prop it back up, and the next night it falls over again and breaks into pieces, and all the people start getting sick. All the Philistines start having tumors and rats and all kinds of problems. And they're like, this Ark of the Covenant is bringing a curse upon us. We got to get rid of it. So basically they say, well, we're going to put it on a cart and just have it head back to Israel. So get it out of our sight, because they believe that this Ark of the Covenant was bringing disaster upon them. And they said, we better bring some offerings with it. And the weird thing is they said, what are we going to, well, you know, the Ark, we're having all these rat problems and everybody's getting tumors. So we'll make gold rats and gold tumors and put them as an offering.
That's what they say.
Yeah. So they make gold rats and gold tumors and put them with the ark and hitch the ark up and slap the animals on the back and say, hey, you know, go to Israel. So that does. And so that way the ark finds its way back into Israel. Okay. So, jumping forward a little bit, so I'm going to jump to chapter 8. So Samuel is judge / prophet / priest, but he gets old. You know, we started the book. He's a baby. Now he's getting to be old. Chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. But here's the irony. Just like Eli's sons were no good, and Samuel was the good kid who wasn't his literal son, but was his apprentice, now Samuel has sons. Samuel grew old. He appointed his sons as judges. The name of his firstborn was Joel. The name of his second was Abijah. They served at Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So the very same thing that happened with Eli and his sons now happens with Samuel and his sons, which is sad. And so the elders basically say to him, 8:5, you're old, and your sons don't walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. You know, we're tired of this lack of central authority. We need a king. We need a king. Like all the other countries have kings. We need a king. Verse 6, 8:6. When they said, give us a king, this displeased Samuel. And he prays to the Lord. And the Lord says, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It's not you they've rejected. They've rejected me as their king, as they've done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they're doing to you. Listen to them, but warn them solemnly. Let them know what the king who will reign over them will do. And that's what Samuel does. He says, well, you know what? You say you want a king? And he starts saying, here's what he's going to want. He's going to take your sons and then make them run with your chariots and make them fit in your army. And he's going to make your people make him weapons. And he's going to take your daughters to be his cooks and his perfumers and his bakers. And he's going to tax you and take your fields and your crops. and your grain, and he's going to take a tenth of everything, and he's going to take the best of your cattle, and he's going to make you basically into his slaves. Verse 18. And when he's done all that, when a king takes all your stuff and taxes you and conscripts all your men into his armies, he says, when that day comes, verse 18, you'll cry out for relief from the king you've chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. It's like, this is what's going to happen if you have a king. This is what a king does to his people. And the people say, 19, they refuse to listen. No, we want a king. So we'll be like all the other nations. So, what does that ring a bell? We want to be like all the other nations. What are they supposed to be? They're supposed to be different from all the other nations. They're supposed to be separate from the other nations. All these laws are meant to reinforce you are different. You are holy, which means different, separate. Your clothes are different. Your food is different. Everything. Your holidays are different. You know, circumcision makes you different. Everything that God gave them was to remind them, you are different. You know, we want to be like all the other countries. We want to be like them. They have kings. Why can't we have a king? So, God says, give them a king. So, we're introduced to the first king, whose name is Saul. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. And we're kind of given this long story about Saul is out looking for donkeys. And he runs into Samuel, and Samuel says, well, you know, your donkeys are going to be fine, but God has chosen you to lead Israel. And Saul says in 9:21, am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? Is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing? And but you know, this is who God has chosen. So chapter 10, Samuel took a flask of oil, poured it on Saul's head, kissed him, saying, has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance? So he anoints Saul, a Benjamite, to be the king. This is the man that God has said you're to anoint. Remember the word Messiah, Mashiach, means anointed one. And to be anointed means when you pour oil on somebody's head. It may not sound like what you want, but that's the way they would set aside somebody to be the king. They would pour oil on their head and say, you would have been anointed, you've been chosen, you've been named the king. So the Messiah, the Mashiach, is the anointed one. So he's the king. Well, Samuel knows he's the king, but the people don't know it yet. So Samuel now is going to make it public. 10:17. Actually 10:18. Samuel summons all the people and says, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of Egypt. I delivered you from the power of Egypt and the kingdoms. But you've now rejected your God, who saves you out of your calamities and distresses. You said, give us a king. So now present yourselves before the Lord by tribes and clans. And Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel. The tribe of Benjamin was chosen, presumably by casting lots, which would be the equivalent of drawing straws. Brought forth the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was chosen. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was chosen. So basically Samuel's like, okay, we're going to narrow this down. First by tribe, then by clan, then by family, until we, keep throwing dice or picking straws or whatever, casting lots, until we say who God has chosen. And of course, the one chosen from the tribe of Benjamin, from that particular clan, is Saul. So it falls to him. When they looked for him, he wasn't to be found. They inquired further of the Lord, has the man come here yet? The Lord said, yes, he's hidden himself among the luggage. Which might say, well, maybe he's not too keen on being king. He's hiding among the luggage. So they go and get it. Verse 23, they ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Saul is the tallest man in Israel. A big man. And Samuel said to all the people, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There's no one like him among all the people, because we know the tallest guy should be the king, you know, which is, I guess that's why Shaq should be, I don't know, you can't remember, right? The people shouted, "Long live the king!" And so, okay, so here we are. We got a king finally, and his name is Saul. And early on, Saul does pretty good. For example, the Ammonites attack an Israeli city called Jabesh Gilead, and they say, we're gonna conquer you, and we're gonna gouge out one eye of every man in the town, just to make sure you stay under our thumb. And so the elders of that town says, well, give us a week to think about that, about the whole eye gouging thing. They send out a call for help, and Saul says, well, we're going to muster the whole nation to go defend these guys. So he calls the whole nation and says, you better show up. And we get a huge group, and they attack, and they win the battle. And the people are like, oh, well, I guess he can be the king, because he rescues this town from the threat of the Ammonites. And at that point, the people are now pretty sold on Saul. And there was a few naysayers at the beginning. He was like, hey, who's this guy? We don't think he can be the king. And once he wins this battle, they say, hey, you remember those guys who said you were not good enough to be king? Shall we execute them now? And Saul's like, no, it's a day of victory. We're not going to execute anybody. It says it in 11:13. No one will be put to death today. Today the Lord has rescued Israel. So he shows himself to be merciful and compassionate. And so he's ensconced now as the king. And Samuel makes his big farewell speech, because he's really old now. And the torch has been passed now to Saul, seemingly. And he reminds them, you better, obey the Lord. That means you too, Saul. Well, we start to see some cracks in that. For example, they're getting ready to fight the Philistines again. And Samuel's supposed to show up and do the offering, make the sacrifice. But he doesn't show up, so Saul's like, I'll just do it myself. Samuel's late, so Saul's like, I'll just do the offering stuff, which is, he's not supposed to do. He's not a priest. And then Samuel shows up immediately thereafter and says, what are you doing? He's like, well, you were late, I thought I'd do it myself. And Samuel's like, you're not following protocol here. But he continues to be king, but he starts to get cocky. And but he's winning battles and jumping up, but he makes some stupid decisions. Like, he decides one way to get his men really motivated is to say, we're not gonna eat until we win this battle. Well, that's, army travels on its stomach, right? Then he says this in 14:24. The men of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, cursed be any man who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the troops tasted food. Now, I guess this was supposed to be a big motivating thing, but it's not a very smart thing. And who should break this little rule but his own son, Jonathan? And they say, hey, Jonathan, your dad said not to eat, but Jonathan eats some honey. And he's like, well, look, you eat a little food, it gives you some pep in your step, And but then they find out that, somebody's eating. Somebody's eating. Who's eating? And they find out, well, it was Jonathan who ate. And so Saul is ready to say, this is 14:44, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you don't die, Jonathan. He's ready because he made this stupid rule. His son broke the rule. He's going to kill his own son for eating honey. But the men won't let him do it. They're like, he's the best soldier you got. You're not going to kill him. And so they stand up against the king, against this stupid idea of killing his son for eating honey. So this is kind of foreshadowing that things are not going well. But Saul is a good warrior, and but God's starting to have some real doubts about him. And the straw breaks when he tells Saul to attack the Amalekites and just wipe them out. But Saul doesn't wipe them out. He takes all the plunder and doesn't destroy it. He takes it. And Samuel says, you didn't follow instructions. And Saul's like, well, but the plunder was good plunder. We took it. We're going to give some of it back to the church or to the temple. We're going to sacrifice it. And Samuel keeps saying, but you didn't follow directions. And Saul's like, well, we did something better than follow directions. We're going to take the plunder and we're going to give it back to God. And Samuel says, 15:22, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice. To heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination. Arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. So because Saul continues to do it his way instead of the way that Samuel says this is the Lord's way, finally Samuel says you're not going to be king anymore. And Saul, verse 24 says, well, okay, I've sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the people. I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin. Come back with me so I may worship the Lord. Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord. The Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe and it tore. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind. He's not a man that he should change his mind. So Samuel says, it's done. The kingdom is going to be, just like you tore my robe, the kingdom is going to be torn from you. And here we finally get to the part maybe that's a little more familiar to us. In chapter 16. So God says to Samuel, 16:1, how long are you going to mourn for Saul? I've rejected him as king. Fill your horn with oil. Be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be the king. So he's got a horn full of oil because he's going to anoint a new king and pour oil on the head of a new king. So he goes to the house of this fella, and Samuel said, wait a minute, if Saul hears about this, he's going to kill me. If he hears I'm going to go anoint his replacement. And the Lord says, no, take an animal, say that you're going there to sacrifice. And so he does. He goes to Bethlehem, and he goes to the house of Jesse, and he says, bring all your sons in. And here's the part we probably are more familiar with, 16:6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, this is the oldest, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. This is the big, strong, oldest son. Verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height. Remember we got in trouble with the whole height thing before with Saul. I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. It's one of those, key verses. Man looks at the outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. And that's as true today as it was then, isn't it? When it comes to choosing leaders, how much does outward appearance matter? So so the other sons start passing in front of him. Verse 8. Jesse called Abinadab, had him pass in front of Samuel. Samuel said, Lord's not chosen this one. Then he had Shammah pass by. Samuel said, nope, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. He says to Jesse, are these all the sons you got? Is this it? Is this all of them? He said 7 sons, and God said, nope, 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 nope. He says, this all you got? And Jesse said, well, there's the youngest. He's out watching the sheep. Samuel said, well, send for him. We won't sit down until he arrives. So he sent and had him brought in. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. The Lord said, rise and anoint him. He's the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. And Samuel then went to Ramah. So God has chosen the youngest son of Jesse, the 8th son of Jesse, David, to be the next king of Israel. But he won't become king for a long time from this point on. He's not going to actually become king for quite a while. Now we're getting to the most famous story in this book. And how David comes into Saul's notice is kind of a two-pronged thing. We're told first that Saul starts to have these horrible spells, an evil spirit. Verse 15. Saul's attendant said to him, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. And what that means, remember, in Old Testament and even New Testament times, any illness was often just called an unclean spirit. Especially something that was not obvious. Something like epilepsy or migraines or something that wasn't, a very obvious injury or tumor or leprosy or something. If somebody had some sort of affliction that made them do crazy things, made them have fits, shakes, tremors, horrible headaches, etc., they would say he's got an evil spirit. There's something in there that we don't know what it is. So Saul starts to have something afflicting him, and they said, you need somebody who can play the harp. And that'll calm you down. That'll soothe your spirit. So they said, well, go find somebody. And they say, well, there's this kid in Bethlehem who plays the harp. He's a good-looking young guy, and he's a good soldier. And so they said, well, bring him in. So they bring in David to be a harp player. Now, the next story is the most famous one, of course, because the Philistines are continuing to be a thorn in the side of the Israelites. And the Philistines are camped on one side of a valley. The Israelites are camped on the other side of the valley. And the Philistines have a particular soldier named, of course, Goliath. And the Bible says he was 9 feet tall. That's pretty tall. It says he had a bronze helmet, and a coat of armor, and a javelin and a spear, and he's a big guy with lots of armor and lots of weaponry. And he would go out every day and taunt the Israelites. Basically saying, let's settle this one-on-one. You send down your best man, and he and I will fight. And here's what he's saying. Verse 8 of 17. Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man. Have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we'll become your subjects. If I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. So this is, let's not just fight each other. Let's just have one guy, one-on-one, and whoever wins, then that side wins. And the other side will become subject to the winners. He says, this day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man. Let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, the idea is, well, why don't you send your biggest guy down here? Who's their biggest guy?
Saul.
Saul. Saul's a head taller than anyone else in Israel. He's their biggest guy. He's not going to go down and fight this 9-foot tall monster. But David is there. It says he's there even just bringing, he's the harp player, but he's now bringing food to his brothers. And Saul is thinking, we got to do something. And says the Israelites have been saying, verse 25, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He'll give him his daughter in marriage. He'll exempt his father's family from taxes. And David says, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And they say, well, the man who could kill him, he's going to be in good shape. And his older brother's like, what are you doing here? Get out of here. And so finally, David goes to Saul, verse 32. Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul says, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're a boy. He's been a fighting man from his youth. And here's David makes his case, verse 34. Your servant's been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he's defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul's like, well, what do we got to lose? No, he doesn't say that, but I feel like that's what he's thinking, like, well, okay. So they put armor on him, but doesn't fit. So he's like, I can't do this. So he gets 5 smooth stones and a slingshot, and he goes down into the valley. And of course, we know this part. The Philistine, Goliath, 41, with his shield in front of him, kept coming closer. He looked at David and saw that he was just a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David said, you come at me with sword and spear. I mean, I don't think he's gone through puberty yet. But I've come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, who you've defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me. I'm going to strike you down and cut off your head. I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or the spear that the Lord saves. The battle is the Lord's, and He'll give you all into our hands. And, of course, we know he slings the rock, hits Goliath right in the middle of the forehead. He falls over. David runs over, grabs his sword, cuts his head off. Sometimes that isn't always shown in the cartoon version. But this fight. Cuts off Goliath's head. And at that point, the Philistines like, okay, you win. We'll be your servants. Is that what they do? No. That little bargain gets quickly forgotten. They turn tail and run. And the whole we'll be your servants thing is just not even followed through. But the Israelites chase them. And, at that point, they have won the battle. And the king is impressed. And here's where he said, now who was that? Which like, that's the guy's playing the harp for you. But anyway, that's David. Okay. So David now is not just the harp player. He becomes a soldier in Saul's army. And he becomes best friends with Jonathan, Saul's son. And the two of them are best friends. And you think, well, this is great. He's a great soldier. He and the king's son are best friends. Everything's great. And it says, verse 5, 18:5, whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army, and this pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. So everything is just hunky-dory and great. And they go out into battle, and they beat the Philistines, And they come back in triumph after beating the Philistines. Verse 6, 18:6, the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, and the women came out from the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, joyful songs and tambourines and lutes. And they danced and they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Now, those are both exaggerations. You know, Saul had not slain thousands of people. David has certainly not slain tens of thousands of people. It's a song. But it does not go over well with Saul. Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They've credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, and me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. So from this point, for the rest of the book, it is this cat and mouse game between Saul and David. And Saul becomes a tragic figure who goes from loving David as a second son, to hating him, to being jealous of him, to trying to kill him, to begging his forgiveness. I mean, he's manic one way and the other. He goes from fits of rage to self-pity. It's really a sad, sad story. Now, not only is David best friends with Jonathan, Saul's daughter, Michal, falls in love with David. 18:20. Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David. And when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I'll give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. And David's like, that's a kind of a big deal. And David says, you know, I'm a nobody. Who am I to marry a princess? Who am I to marry the king's daughter? So Saul has an idea. An awful idea. Like the Grinch, an awful idea. Verse 24, Saul's servants told him what David said. Saul said, say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. Like, you can have my daughter in marriage. The price of her is 100 Philistine foreskins, which, you know, not to be taken alive. I mean, taken from their corpses. So David's like, oh, well, okay, if I can earn it, I guess I can do it. So he goes and he kills 200 Philistines and brings back their foreskins, which I just think of a big sack full of that. I mean, here you go. You know, here it is.
Are you going to count them out?
Yeah. I brought 200 just to be safe. You asked for 100, but I brought you 200, so enjoy those.
Why is this not preached on Sunday morning?
About the foreskins? Yeah, you know. You know, I can on the ride home from church. Mommy, what's a foreskin?
Very sad.
Yeah. So of course he gets Michal as his wife. But Saul starts to have these fits of rage and decides finally he's just going to kill David. But David gets wind of this because he's best friends with Jonathan, and he escapes. And they have this conversation, David and Jonathan, in chapter 20. David flees from Saul, and he says to his best friend, the son of the king, 20 verse 1, what have I done? What's my crime? How have I wronged your father? That he's trying to take my life. You know, like, why does he hate me? Why is he trying to kill me? And of course, it's jealousy. Jealousy and madness. And Jonathan's like, well, you know, he's not going to kill you. He'll listen to me. So Jonathan tries to talk to his father and says, look, David is loyal. David's a good soldier. David's not after your crown. You know why? You know, he tries to reason with his father. But his father, here's what Saul's response to his son is in chapter 20, verse 30. Saul's anger flared at Jonathan. He said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you've sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die." You're my heir. You know, David's going to take the throne and you will not be the new king. You know, and he yelling at Jonathan. And Jonathan's like, "Why should he be put to death? What's he done?" But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. And Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. And so they part and weep with each other that David now has to go on the run. And for several chapters here, that's what David is on the run with Saul chasing him. And David does some clever and unconventional things to get away from Saul. I like when he goes and hides in all places in Gath. Remember where Gath is? Who was from Gath?
Goliath.
Goliath of Gath. So he hides out in the Philistine territory. And it says he hides out with the king of Gath. And look at it, 21:10. I just think this is a funny exchange. But David says, "Well, I'm going to have to hide away from Saul somewhere." David fled from Saul, went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. This guy's nuts. Achish said to his servants, "Look at the man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fella here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" I just like, don't I have enough crazy people? Do you have to bring me even more crazy people? But people who were mad were kind of considered to be, there's something scary, like you don't touch a madman. You just, you kind of leave him alone. So David is pretending to be a crazy man. Well, he's harmless. He's a crazy man. So he hides out there for a while. And Saul keeps chasing him. And that's diverting Saul from fighting the Philistines. He's so obsessed with tracking down David and killing him. And probably the most, I guess, famous story of that is over in chapter 24. 24. Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines when he was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and set out to look for David and for his men near the crags of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. So Saul goes into this cave to use the bathroom, and that's the very cave where David and his men are hiding. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I'll give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Like, he's alone, he's defenseless. Kill him. David crept up unnoticed and cut off the corner of Saul's robe while he was doing his business. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him. He's the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. Saul left the cave and went his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king!" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you've seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master. He's the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but I didn't kill you. Understand and recognize I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you're hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you've done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, and my hand will not touch you. And jumping down, verse 16, David finished. Saul said, is that your voice, David, my son? And he wept aloud. You are more righteous than I. You've treated me well. I've treated you badly. You've just not told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, and you didn't kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me. I know that you'll surely be king. The kingdom will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my family's name. And David gave his oath. Then Saul returned home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. So Saul has a moment of clarity and regret. Calls David my son. I know you're going to be the king. I know you're right and I'm wrong. But that doesn't mean he stopped hunting him, because it happens again in chapter 26. He's hunting David again. And David again has the opportunity to kill him, but doesn't. And, it's a similar story, where once again David gets right up next to him and could have killed him, but he doesn't. And once again Saul realizes David is the better man. Well, skipping over to the end, we don't have time for every piece of story, but the end of the book, it deals with what eventually happens to Saul. David continues to be on the run. Saul continues to be obsessed with him. David continues to use trickery to hide and disguise himself and pretend to be a mercenary, pretending to work for the enemy when he's really not. David does all kinds of tricks to stay out of Saul's way. But finally, in the final battle, in the last chapter of 1 Samuel, once again, Saul is fighting Philistines. And this is chapter 31. The Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. Usually an armor-bearer is a teenage boy. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. So Saul kills himself. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. And Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all of his men died together that same day. And then it says, jumping down, the next day when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. I've been to Bethshan. That's one of the places when we went to Israel we got to visit, was Bethshan, where the Philistines hung the bodies of Saul and his sons. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard of what the Philistines had done, remember that's the town that they were going to gouge their eyes out, and Saul mustered the troops to come rescue them. When the people of that town heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men journeyed through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the walls of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. They took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree. and Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. So because of what Saul had done for them, they rescued the bodies which were on display by the Philistines and took them down and brought them back and burned them and buried them out of respect for Saul and his sons. So the first book of Samuel ends the saga of the first king of Israel, Saul. And the second book of Samuel, which is really the book of David, the second book of Samuel is the story of David's reign as king, which is full of greatness and tragedy. David's story is high highs and low lows. And David's story is one of the most fascinating, I think, and tragic and inspiring. And David's story is just, we've already seen the first part of his story, but once he ascends to the throne, it gets even more fascinating. So we'll do that next week. So let's pray.